Have you ever had that strange feeling? Like someone who used to be such a big part of your life is now just distant. Not in a dramatic way, not with some big argument or clear ending, just different. It doesn't hit you all at once. That's the thing. It creeps in quietly, so quietly that for a long time you don't even want to admit it to yourself. Until one day, you feel it. That distance. There was a time, right, when their name showing up on your phone actually meant something. You didn't have to think twice. You didn't reread your message before sending it. You didn't wonder if you were saying too much or too little. You just talked. Everything felt easy, natural, like breathing. And now, you open the same chat, and something feels off. You stare at the screen a little longer than usual. You read their message, and instead of replying right away, you hesitate. Not because you're busy, not really. It's more like you don't quite know what to say anymore. And that's new, because before, you always knew. Now it feels like every conversation needs effort, like you're trying to rebuild something that used to just exist on its own. And even when you try, it doesn't land the same way. And maybe you tell yourself, it's nothing. You say, they're just busy. Or, I've been busy too. Or that life is just messy right now, and eventually things will go back to normal. We tell ourselves those things a lot. But if you're being honest, really honest, you already feel it. Something has changed. Not broken completely, not ended in a way you can point to, just shifted, in a way that doesn't quite go back. And somehow, that makes it harder, because when something ends clearly, you can deal with it. You can cry about it, talk about it, say, that's where it ended. There's closure. But when something fades, there's no clear ending. Just longer gaps between messages, shorter replies, less effort, less warmth, less of something you can't quite name. And you start noticing things you didn't notice before. You notice that you're always the one reaching out first. You notice they don't ask how you are the same way anymore. You notice the energy feels different, even if no one says it out loud. And at first, you probably ignore it. Because honestly, it's easier that way. It's easier to pretend nothing's wrong than to admit that something important isn't what it used to be. Because once you admit it, you can't unsee it. And that realization, it doesn't come all at once. It builds slowly. It shows up in small, quiet moments. Like when you scroll back through old messages, late at night, and realize how different everything used to feel, how much effort there was, how much you both cared. Or when you see them posting something, living their life, and you realize you're not really part of it anymore. Not the way you used to be. And that feeling, it's hard to explain. It's not exactly anger. It's not even the kind of sadness you expect. It's softer than that, quieter. It sits in your chest in a way that's hard to describe, like something is missing, but nothing is officially gone. It's a kind of ache, the kind that comes from realizing that someone who once felt permanent is slowly becoming part of your past. And maybe the hardest part? You didn't choose it. There wasn't a conversation where you both agreed to drift apart. There wasn't a moment where you said goodbye. It just happened. And that leaves you with questions. A lot of them. You wonder if you did something wrong. You wonder if they changed. Or maybe you're the one who changed. You wonder if this was always going to happen. And sometimes, there's no clear answer. That's the uncomfortable part. Because not every ending has a reason you can understand. Sometimes people don't leave in obvious ways. They don't walk out. They just slowly stop showing up the same way. And over time, you realize you're not standing in the same place anymore. Not because of a fight. Not because of something dramatic. Just because you've grown in different directions. And growth doesn't always match. One person moves forward in one way. The other moves somewhere else. And without either of you really noticing, the distance grows. And that kind of loss, people don't talk about it enough. Because on the outside, It doesn't look like loss. There's no breakup, no big argument, no final scene, just a quiet separation. But it still hurts. Because you remember. You remember who they were to you. You remember what you shared. You remember how natural it felt to have them in your life. And now, something about that space feels off. Not completely empty, just not the same. And maybe you're still holding on. Not to who they are now, but to who they used to be. To the version of them that really saw you. To the version of the relationship that felt easy and safe. To the memories that still feel real, even though the present doesn't match anymore. And holding on to that, it can be confusing. Because part of you knows things have changed. But another part of you doesn't want to let go. Because letting go feels like losing something that mattered. Something that shaped you. Something that once felt irreplaceable. And maybe it really was. Maybe it did matter that much. Maybe it really was as real as you remember it. But here's something we don't always say out loud. Not everything meaningful is meant to last forever. Some connections are temporary, even when they feel permanent at the time. Some people are part of your life for a chapter, not the whole story. And realizing that, it's not easy. Because we grow up believing that real connections are the ones that stay. That loyalty means holding on no matter what. That love means not letting go. But life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes, growing means creating distance. Sometimes, becoming who you're meant to be means outgrowing certain people. And that doesn't make those relationships fake. It doesn't erase what they once meant. It just means they don't fit your life anymore. And that truth, it's quiet. It doesn't come with noise or drama, but it's real. And maybe that's exactly where you are right now. Somewhere in between. Not fully holding on, not fully letting go, just stuck in that space between what was and what is. And if that's you, you're not the only one. This happens to more people than you think. At some point in life, almost everyone reaches this moment. That quiet realization that not everyone is meant to stay. Not because you did something wrong, not because they did something wrong, but because life moves, people move, and sometimes they just don't move in the same direction anymore. And when that happens, you're left with a choice. You can keep holding on to what it used to be, or you can slowly, gently, begin to let it go. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just with understanding, with acceptance, with that quiet realization that some people were meant to be part of your life, just not forever. There's a kind of quiet that you don't really understand until you get older. It's not the peaceful kind people talk about when they imagine retirement or slowing down. Not that soft, comforting silence you think you'll enjoy someday. No, this one feels different. It lingers. It sits in the corners of your home, in the hallway, in the kitchen while the kettle is heating, in the living room where the TV is on but you're not really watching. It's there when you move through your routines, doing the same things you've always done, but somehow, everything feels just a little more empty than it used to. And if you're honest, you've felt it. Maybe it's in the morning. You wake up earlier than you need to. No alarm, just your body doing what it does now. The sky is still dim, that gray-blue color right before the sun comes up. You sit there for a moment, not rushing to get up, just sitting, listening. No footsteps in the next room, no one calling your name, no background noise of someone else starting their day. Just stillness. And in that stillness, your mind starts to wander. Not to big things. Not to plans or tasks. To people. You start thinking about people you used to talk to without even thinking. The friend you used to call every Sunday. The neighbor who used to drop by just to chat, sometimes for no reason at all. The relative who would check in, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to know how you were doing. And somewhere along the way, those connections changed. They didn't disappear all at once. It wasn't like someone packed up and left overnight. It's more like they slowly faded into the background. Still there, maybe, but not really part of your everyday life anymore. And you notice that. You notice it more than you used to. Maybe you had a friend like that. Someone you shared years with. Not just time, but real moments. Conversations that went on for hours. Meals where you lost track of time. Laughing about things that didn't even make sense to anyone else. Back then, it felt solid. Like no matter what happened in life, that connection would stay. You didn't question it. You didn't think about losing it. It just existed. But life doesn't stay still. It has its own rhythm, whether we like it or not. You called less, they called less. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. People get busy, right? Things happen. Then the visits became occasional, then rare, and eventually, you find yourself remembering them more than actually seeing them. And if you really think about it, if you imagine sitting across from them now, having a conversation like you used to, there's a part of you that wonders if it would feel the same, or if there would be that slight awkwardness, that small gap where something used to be. And that thought, it carries weight, more than you expect, because it's not just about missing a person, it's about missing a time in your life when things felt a certain way. And then there's another kind of situation. This one is harder to admit. A relationship you stayed in longer than you probably should have. Not because it made you happy, but because it was familiar. You knew how it worked. You understood the patterns. You knew what to say, what not to say, when to stay quiet, when to step back. You learned to adjust. And, over time, you got really good at it. So good that you didn't even realize how much you were holding in. You carried the emotional weight without complaining. You convinced yourself that this is just part of life, that every relationship has its difficulties, that you just have to endure. And years pass like that, not with big dramatic moments, but with small compromises, over and over again. And slowly, something inside you starts to wear down. Not all at once, just little by little, like a candle burning lower and lower, until you don't even notice how much has melted away. And still, you stay. Because leaving feels like breaking something that took years to build. Because starting over feels exhausting. Because at a certain point in life, you don't want to begin again from nothing. So you stay in something that doesn't quite fit anymore. And that kind of environment, it does something to you. Not just emotionally. It shows up in your body, in your sleep, in the way you carry yourself. People don't always realize this, but the energy around you, it matters. In feng shui, they talk about how the way your home is arranged can affect how you feel, how clutter can make your mind feel crowded, how certain spaces can either calm you or make you restless. But it's not just furniture or objects. People carry energy too. And when the people around you feel heavy, critical, draining, that energy doesn't just stay outside of you, it settles in. You feel it in your shoulders at the end of the day. You feel it when you can't quite relax, even when nothing is happening. You feel it in the way your thoughts keep circling, even when you're trying to rest. And then, there's family. This is where things get even more complicated, because we're taught that family is something you don't question, that it's permanent, that you accept it no matter what. But the truth is, not every family relationship feels warm. Some feel distant, some feel tense, some feel like you're always being evaluated, even when no one says it directly. You show up, you visit, you call when you're supposed to. And still, there's that feeling that you're not quite enough, not successful enough, not thoughtful enough, not living your life the way they think you should. And it's not always said out loud. Sometimes it's just in the tone, in the small comments, in the comparisons that come up in conversation. And over time, that feeling stays with you. It settles somewhere deep. You might not talk about it, but you start holding back, saying less, sharing less, protecting yourself, without even realizing that's what you're doing. And then there are those social moments, gatherings, invitations, events where you're surrounded by people. You smile, you talk, you respond. On the outside, everything looks normal. But inside, something feels slightly off. Like you're there, but not really there. Like you're playing a role. You laugh when it's expected. You nod along. You say what fits the moment. But it doesn't quite feel like you. And when you get home, you feel tired. Not physically, something else. A deeper kind of tired. Because you spent hours adjusting yourself to fit into a space that didn't fully match who you are anymore. And as time goes on, you start noticing this more. You begin to recognize which people leave you feeling calm and which ones leave you unsettled. And this is where something starts to change. Quietly, you start asking yourself things you never used to ask. Why do I feel drained after certain conversations? Why do I feel at ease with some people and tense with others? Why do I keep going back to places where I don't feel fully comfortable? And those questions? They don't have easy answers, but they lead you somewhere important. You begin to understand. Not every relationship is meant to stay the same forever. Not every connection continues to support who you are becoming. And that realization, it can feel uncomfortable at first, almost like you're doing something wrong just by thinking it. But you're not. It's just part of life. Things change. People change. And sometimes, distance is part of that process. Some connections grow quieter. Some slowly fade. Some need space so you can feel balanced again. And when you start to see it this way, something softens inside you. You stop blaming yourself so quickly. You stop forcing things that don't feel natural anymore. You start paying attention to how you feel, not just how things are supposed to look. And this doesn't mean cutting people off. It doesn't mean becoming distant or cold. It just means being honest with yourself, recognizing where your energy feels supported and where it feels drained. And then, making small adjustments. Maybe you stay a little less time when you visit. Maybe you don't answer every call right away. Maybe you choose quiet over conversation when that's what you need. These are small things, but they matter more than you think. Because over time, they change the feeling of your life. And at this stage, that feeling matters. The atmosphere of your home, the way your days unfold, the quiet inside your own mind. All of it becomes more important than trying to meet expectations. Because peace, at this point, it's not something extra. It's something you need. And sometimes, that peace begins with understanding. Understanding that what you feel is real. Understanding that change is normal. Understanding that it's okay for things to shift, even if that means some distance. And if you've been feeling this, you're not the only one. A lot of people go through this quietly. They don't talk about it, but they feel it. That same distance, that same questioning, that same slow shift in how they see their relationships. And little by little, they adjust. Not all at once, just step by step. In how they spend their time, in what they say yes to, in what they gently step away from. And over time, something begins to lift. Not completely, but enough. Enough for you to notice. Enough for you to breathe a little easier. And that space that opens up, that's where something new begins. Not necessarily new people, but a new way of living. Quieter, simpler, more honest, where you're no longer trying to belong everywhere, but finally choosing the places that feel like home. There's something people don't really say out loud, especially as they get older. It's not just that relationships get complicated. It's not even just about people drifting apart. It's the letting go part. That's the part no one really prepares you for. Because when you sit with it for a moment, really sit with it, letting go isn't just about losing a person. It's everything tied to them. The habits you built together. The small routines that didn't seem important at the time. The way your days used to feel when they were still part of them. Even the version of you, the one that existed back then. And once you see it that way, it gets messy. Because even when something doesn't feel right anymore, even when you can sense, deep down, that things have changed, you don't just walk away, you hesitate. You pause in ways you didn't before. You tell yourself, give it a little more time. Maybe things will settle. Maybe it's just a phase. And if you pay attention to that hesitation, you start to notice something. It's not just one thing holding you there. It's not simple. It's layers. Quiet owns. The kind you don't even realize are there until you sit with them long enough. And one of the biggest ones, it's very human. It's that quiet fear of being alone. Not the dramatic version people imagine. Not some extreme loneliness where you have no one at all. It's softer than that. Harder to point to. It's waking up in the morning and realizing there's no one you can call without thinking about it first. No one you can casually tell about something small. Like what you saw at the grocery store, or how your day went. Even if it wasn't anything special. It's the absence of those ordinary connections. And when you've had that kind of presence in your life for years, even if it wasn't perfect, losing it feels like something bigger than it should. So you hold on, even when it doesn't feel the same anymore. Even when the conversations feel a little forced, a little off, because something, even something imperfect, still feels better than nothing. And that thought alone, it keeps a lot of people in places they've already outgrown. If you're honest, you might see it in your own life. Maybe there's someone you still talk to out of habit. The conversations aren't bad. They're just not what they used to be. You tell yourself it's fine. This is just how things evolve. But after you hang up, or after the conversation ends, there's this feeling, a kind of tiredness, not the kind that sleep fixes, something quieter. And still, you keep showing up, because the silence that would replace it feels heavier, because not having that connection at all feels like something you're not quite ready to face yet. And then there's another layer, habit. This one is easy to overlook. When someone has been part of your life for a long time, they don't just exist as a person, they become part of your rhythm. You're used to them being there, even if they're not really showing up the same way anymore. You're used to certain conversations, certain check-ins, certain expectations that just exist without being questioned. And after a while, it all becomes automatic. You don't stop and ask yourself if it still makes sense. You just keep going. Like walking through your house in the dark. You don't need to think about where things are. Your body already knows. But sometimes, what's familiar isn't what's right. And that's uncomfortable to admit. Because changing a habit, even a quiet one, takes more effort than staying in it. Even when that habit doesn't bring you anything anymore, you might call someone not because you miss them, but because that's what you've always done. You might visit, not because you feel at peace there, but because it feels expected. And it's not that you don't care. That's not it. It's just that something has shifted, and the habit hasn't caught up yet. And habits, they don't let go easily. Then there's time. This one carries weight. Years of knowing someone. Everything you've been through together. Moments that felt important at the time, and still do when you think about them. When you consider stepping away from someone like that, all of it comes rushing in at once. You think about the investment, the effort, the history, and a question comes up almost immediately. How do I walk away from something that has been part of my life for so long? It almost feels wrong, like you're erasing something, like you're saying those years didn't matter. But that's not true. They did matter. They still do. They shaped you in ways you can't even fully explain. But staying just because of the past doesn't always make sense for the present. Still, separating those two things is not easy. Because time creates attachment, and attachment makes letting go feel like loss, even when part of you knows it might actually bring you peace. And then, there's something we don't talk about enough. The pressure from the outside. Not loud pressure, not direct, but it's there. The idea that you should keep things together. That you should stay loyal. That you shouldn't be the one to create distance, especially later in life. There's this quiet expectation that you hold on to relationships, not question them, that you keep the peace, even if that peace doesn't feel real. You've probably heard it before. Family is forever. You don't turn your back on people. You stay connected, no matter what. Those ideas stay with you. They shape how you see things. And when you start to feel like you need space, they make you second guess yourself. You start wondering, what will people think? Am I being selfish? Am I doing something wrong without realizing it? And because of that, you stay. Not because it feels right inside, but because it feels like what you're supposed to do. And over time, that expectation becomes something you carry quietly. And then there's hope. This one is complicated because hope is not a bad thing. It keeps people going. It helps people get through difficult moments. But sometimes, hope keeps you in a place that doesn't exist anymore. You tell yourself, maybe things will go back to how they were. Maybe they'll change. Maybe if I'd just give it more time. So you wait. You wait longer than you probably should. You wait for something to shift. But the version of that person you're holding on to, it might not be there anymore. And that's hard to face. Because you're not holding on to who they are now. You're holding on to a memory, or a possibility, or a version of them that made you feel something you're still trying to hold on to. And that gap between what is real now and what you wish it could be, that's where the confusion lives. Part of you sees things clearly, but another part doesn't want to let go of what could have been. And that's where people get stuck, right in the middle, not fully holding on, not fully letting go, just staying there. If you step back and look at it from a psychological point of view, it actually makes sense. People tend to choose what feels familiar, even when it's uncomfortable, because the unknown feels riskier, even if the unknown might actually be better. So you stay with what you know, with people, with patterns, with environments that feel predictable, because predictable feels safe. But safe doesn't always mean healthy. And this is where things start to shift, very slowly. You begin to notice your own patterns, not all at once, but in small moments. You start to see why you hesitate, why you hold on. And instead of judging yourself, you start to understand. You begin to realize this isn't weakness. It's not failure. It's just human. It's your need for connection, your attachment to what feels familiar, the weight of everything you've experienced, the expectations you've carried for years, the hope you haven't quite let go of. All of it makes sense. And when you see it clearly like that, something softens. You stop being so hard on yourself. You stop asking, why can't I just let go? And instead, you ask something quieter, something more honest. What is actually keeping me here? And that question, it doesn't change everything overnight, but it opens something, a space. And inside that space, you begin to understand. And that understanding, that's where everything starts. There comes a moment, and it's not always obvious when it starts, where something inside you just begins to loosen a little. Not in a big, dramatic way. Not like you wake up one morning and decide everything has to change. It's quieter than that. Almost like a small shift you can't quite explain at first. You just start to feel it. That maybe you don't have to hold on so tightly anymore. And that realization, it doesn't push you into some big action. It doesn't mean you suddenly cut people off or make some clear announcement like, this is it, I'm done. No. If anything, it moves in the opposite direction. It becomes softer, more subtle, especially as you get older. You begin to see that the changes that matter the most are rarely the loud ones. They're the quiet ones, the kind no one else really notices, at least not at first. It might start with something very small, something almost unnoticeable from the outside. You begin to give yourself a little space, not in a cold way, not in a way that pushes people away, just a bit more room to breathe. Maybe before, you used to pick up every call right away, reply to every message almost immediately, always be available, no matter what you were doing. Now, you pause. You let the phone ring a little longer. Sometimes you see the message, and you don't respond right away. You wait. Maybe you reply later, when it feels right, instead of when it feels expected. And the first few times you do that, it feels strange, even uncomfortable. You might feel a small pinch of guilt because you're not used to it. You've spent years being the one who shows up, the one who answers, the one who doesn't delay. So this feels different. But then you notice something. Nothing bad happens. No one gets upset the way you feared. The world keeps moving. And more importantly, you feel different. A little less rushed. A little less pulled in every direction. And that feeling, it stays with you. Then, without even planning it, you take another small step. You stop reaching out as often, not in a way that feels intentional or calculated. It just happens. Before, you might have called someone because it was part of your routine, because it was what you always did at a certain time on a certain day. Now, you catch yourself. You pause for a moment and ask, do I actually want to have this conversation right now? And sometimes the answer surprises you. Sometimes it's no. Not because you don't care, just because you're tired, or you need quiet, or you simply don't feel like talking. So you don't call, or you wait. And that waiting, it's not about distance. It's about honesty. And slowly, something shifts in how your relationships feel. Because you're no longer acting out of habit. You're acting from a place that feels more real. And that changes things. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Then there's something that takes a little more courage. Saying no. Not sharply, not in a way that hurts people. Just simply, calmly. No, I can't today. I think I need some time for myself. Those words sound simple. But if you've spent years putting others first, they don't feel simple at all. They feel heavy. You might say no, and immediately feel like you need to explain yourself. You start adding reasons, trying to soften it, trying to make sure the other person understands, doesn't feel rejected. That's natural. Most people do that at first. But after a while, you start to see something. You don't always need to explain so much. You don't always need to justify your space. Sometimes, a quiet, respectful no is enough. And over time, it becomes easier. Not completely comfortable at first. You might still feel that small tension inside, a question in your mind. Was that okay? But then, something else comes in. Relief. A sense of lightness you didn't expect. Because for once, you didn't push yourself past your own limit. You listened. And that matters more than you thought it would. Then your attention starts to shift in another direction. How you spend your time. This one changes everything. Because as time goes on, you begin to feel it differently. You don't see it as endless anymore. You notice how quickly days pass, how certain moments stay with you while others feel like they just drain you. And you begin to ask yourself different questions. Not what should I do, but where do I actually feel at ease? Who do I feel comfortable being myself around? What leaves me feeling calm instead of tired? And slowly, your choices start to follow those answers. Maybe it's something simple, spending more time at home, not hiding away, just being in a space that feels familiar, steady. Sitting near a window in the afternoon, watching the light move across the room, holding a warm cup of tea or coffee, not rushing anywhere, letting the quiet be, not empty, but peaceful. Or maybe it means saying no to certain gatherings, not because you've stopped caring about people, but because you've started caring more about how you feel. You begin to choose the places where you don't have to adjust yourself so much, where conversation feels easy, or where silence doesn't feel awkward, where you can just sit and be. And then you notice something else. There are only a few people who truly feel right to be around. Not many, just a handful. But with them, everything feels different. You don't have to think about what to say. You don't leave feeling drained. You feel lighter. And naturally, you start giving more of your time to those connections. Not out of obligation, but because you genuinely want to. You call them because you feel like it. You spend time together, and afterward, you notice how calm you feel. That contrast, it becomes very clear, and something begins to take shape inside you. You're not pushing people away. You're not cutting anything off. You're just adjusting, quietly, where your energy goes. And that's a big difference. It's not about removing everything. It's about softening what no longer feels right and gently holding on to what does. In a way, it's not so different from how you take care of your home. You don't throw everything out. You just move things around. You let go of what feels heavy. You create space where things feel tight. You let light in. And slowly, the whole place feels different. Lighter. Easier to be in. Your relationships, they can shift the same way. You don't have to force them to stay the same. You don't have to break them either. Sometimes, you just stop forcing. And that alone changes everything. From the outside, these changes might look small, almost invisible, but inside, they matter. Because your days start to feel different. Less tension, less pressure, more space, more clarity. And over time, something deeper grows from that. A kind of quiet confidence. You trust yourself a little more. You respect your own limits in a way you didn't before. You begin to understand that peace isn't something you get by holding everything together. It comes from letting things settle, naturally. And that kind of change, it doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. One small moment at a time. A pause before answering. A gentle no when you need it. A simple choice to spend your time where it feels right. They don't look like big decisions, but they carry weight. And over time, they reshape your life. Not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, quiet one. More balanced, more honest, more peaceful. And maybe that's what matters now. Not doing more, not holding tighter, but learning, in your own time, to let things rest where they belong. And giving yourself, finally, a little more room to breathe. There's a story I want to share with you. Nothing dramatic, no big twists, no clear villain, no clear ending where everything suddenly makes sense. Just a quiet kind of story. The kind that doesn't seem important at first, but the longer you sit with it, the more familiar it starts to feel. Let's call her Linda. You probably know someone like her. Or maybe, in some ways, you are her. Linda lived a pretty steady life. She worked, she took care of what needed to be taken care of, she raised her family, she showed up when she was supposed to. If someone asked about her, they'd say she's dependable. The kind of person you can count on. Nothing unusual about that. And for a long time, there was someone who was just always there. A friend. Not the kind you think about all the time. Not the kind you question. Just someone who had always been part of her life. They met years ago, back when things felt simpler, or maybe just easier. They had those long conversations that didn't need planning, lunches that stretched longer than expected, small everyday moments that slowly built something that felt permanent. They never really said it out loud, but it felt like it would always be there. That friendship became part of Linda's life the way certain things quietly become permanent. Like a chair in your house that's been in the same spot for years. You don't think about it. You don't move it. You just live around it. And for a long time, it worked. They talked often. They showed up for each other. When something happened, good or bad, this was the person Linda thought of first. It was just part of her life. But then, things started to change. Not all at once, nothing obvious. It began in small ways. A comment here and there that didn't sit right. A tone that felt slightly sharper than it used to. Conversations that ended with a feeling Linda couldn't quite name. Just something off. At first, she ignored it. That's what most people do. She told herself, everyone has bad days. People don't always say things perfectly. It doesn't mean anything. So, she kept going. She called like she always had. She listened. She stayed present. But those small moments didn't disappear. They started happening more often. Her friend would interrupt her mid-sentence, brush off her opinions in a way that felt casual on the surface, but not really, make jokes that seemed harmless, but somehow stayed with her long after the conversation ended. And Linda started noticing something she hadn't paid attention to before. After spending time with this person, she felt drained. Not tired in the usual sense, not like she needed sleep. Something else, a kind of heaviness that followed her home. She'd sit in her living room afterward, sometimes turning the TV on just for the noise, not even watching it. Just sitting there, thinking, why do I feel like this? She didn't say it out loud, didn't talk to anyone about it, just kept it to herself. And still, she didn't change anything. Because this wasn't just anyone. This was someone who had been there for years. Someone who had seen different versions of her life. And that history, it meant something. So she stayed. She adjusted. Spoke a little less, thought a little more before saying things, avoided topics that seemed to create tension. She didn't even realize it at first, but she started shrinking herself. Not completely, just enough. Enough to keep things smooth. Enough to avoid that uncomfortable feeling. And that became her new normal. For a long time, years, actually. If you looked from the outside, everything seemed fine. They were still friends. Still meeting. Still talking. Nothing had ended. But inside, something was slowly wearing down. There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from being busy. It comes from being somewhere you can't fully be yourself. Linda didn't have words for it back then. She just felt it. In small moments. Like when she hesitated before picking up the phone. Or when plans got canceled. And she felt something unexpected. Relief. That feeling? It caught her off guard. But even then, she didn't act on it. Because letting go felt too big. Too final. Too complicated to even think about. Until one day, something small happened. Nothing dramatic. No argument. No raised voices. Just a conversation. Her friend said something dismissive again. Something that made Linda feel like her thoughts didn't really matter. And this time, she didn't brush it off. She didn't laugh. Didn't change the subject. She just noticed it. Really noticed it. And later that day, she was sitting alone in her kitchen. There was a cup of coffee in front of her that had gone cold, but she hadn't realized it yet. And a thought came to her. Quiet, but clear. She felt more at peace when she wasn't around that person. That thought didn't go away. It stayed. It followed her through the next few days. And slowly, it became clearer. And with that clarity came a question she had never really allowed herself to ask. Why am I still holding on to something that makes me feel this way? That question, it wasn't easy. It made her uncomfortable. Because it meant looking at something she had avoided for years. It meant admitting that history wasn't enough anymore. That time alone wasn't a reason to stay. But even then, she didn't do anything drastic. She didn't confront her friend. Didn't cut things off. She just stepped back. Quietly, she called less. Took longer to respond. Let the space grow on its own. And at first, it felt strange. There was guilt. A part of her wondering if she was being unfair. But there was also something else. Something quieter. Relief. A calm feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. And as time passed, that calm started to feel familiar. It became part of her days. She began noticing things she hadn't paid attention to before. How quiet her home felt. In a good way. How her thoughts felt less crowded. How her body felt more relaxed. Without that constant tension she didn't even realize she was carrying. And she began to understand something. The people we allow into our lives, they affect us more than we think. Not in big, obvious ways, but in small, repeated ones. In how conversations feel, in how we carry those interactions afterward. And when that energy feels heavy, it stays with you. But when it slowly fades away, something shifts. In feng shui, they say when you remove what no longer fits, the whole space changes. Not instantly, but gradually. The air feels different. The light feels different. The room becomes easier to be in. That's what Linda started to feel. Nothing dramatic had happened, but everything felt lighter. And what surprised her the most, she didn't feel like she had lost something. She felt like she had gotten something back. A sense of herself, a sense of space, a sense of quiet that didn't feel empty, but peaceful. And over time, she found herself reconnecting with other parts of her life. Spending time with people who didn't make her feel small, sitting in silence without needing to fill it, noticing simple things again, the sound of the morning, the way light came through the window, the comfort of just being where she was. And if you asked her now, she probably wouldn't say she let go. She might just say she stopped holding on so tightly. And somehow, that changed everything. Because sometimes, the biggest shifts don't come from doing something big. They come from choosing something different, quietly. And maybe, as you hear this, something in it feels familiar. Not exactly the same, but close enough. A person, a feeling, something you haven't quite put into words yet. And if that's true, then maybe this story isn't just about Linda. Maybe, in some quiet way, it's about you too. And that moment, when you start to realize you deserve to feel at ease in your own life. There's something people don't really notice at first when they talk about letting go. Most of the time, when we hear that phrase, we immediately think about other people, about stepping away, creating distance, accepting that a relationship has changed or maybe even ended. That's usually where the conversation stops. But if you sit with it, not just for a moment, but really sit with it, something else starts to come up, something quieter. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't letting go of someone else. It's letting go of the version of yourself that existed with them. And that part, people don't talk about enough. Because it's more personal. It's not just about what they did or didn't do. It's about who you became in that space. When you think back on certain relationships, you're not just remembering a person, you're remembering how you were, how you spoke, the tone you used, the things you allowed, even when they didn't feel quite right, the way you stayed quiet when maybe you had something to say. And sometimes, when you look at that version of yourself now, it feels a little unfamiliar. Not completely wrong, just not quite you anymore. But it doesn't disappear right away. That version of you, it lingers. It shows up in small, almost automatic ways. You might notice it in a conversation. Right before you speak, there's that tiny hesitation. You adjust your words. You soften what you were about to say. Not because anyone told you to, just because that's what you're used to doing. That habit, it sticks around, even after the relationship changes, even after you've created some distance. Because at that point, it's no longer about them. It's about what you've learned to do over time. And unlearning that takes a while. For a lot of people, especially those who have spent years trying to maintain relationships, there's this belief that being understood means being accepted. So you explain. You explain again. You repeat yourself in different ways. You adjust your tone, your words, your reactions, all in the hope that at some point, the other person will really understand you. And sometimes, they don't. Not because you didn't try hard enough, but because not everyone is able to understand you the way you want. And that realization, it doesn't always feel good at first, because everyone wants to feel seen. Everyone wants that moment where someone just gets it, without effort. But as time passes, you start to see it differently. You start to understand that not everyone is meant to fully understand you. And that doesn't mean anything is wrong. It's just how people are. Everyone carries their own experiences, their own way of thinking, their own way of seeing things. And expecting someone to step completely into your perspective, it's more than most people can do. So little by little, you begin to let that go. Not in a big, obvious way, just quietly. You stop explaining every little detail. You stop trying to make every conversation perfectly clear. Sometimes, you just say what you feel and leave it there. And if it's not fully understood, you don't chase it the way you used to. That shift, it creates space. At first, it might feel strange, because you're so used to trying, to adjusting, to making sure everything feels smooth. But over time, it becomes easier. You feel less pressure, less need to prove something. And that space, it brings a kind of calm that's hard to describe until you feel it. Then there's another layer, the need to be liked. This one runs deeper than most people realize, especially if you've spent years taking care of others, keeping peace, making sure things don't become uncomfortable. You learn how to read a room. You know what to say, what not to say. You know how to make people feel comfortable, even if it means putting yourself aside a little. And for a long time, that works. It keeps things smooth. It keeps relationships intact. But after a while, something doesn't feel right anymore. You start to notice that being liked doesn't always feel satisfying. You can be liked and still feel unseen. You can be appreciated and still feel a little disconnected. And that realization, it changes something inside you. You start asking yourself questions you didn't ask before. Do I want to be liked? Or do I want to be real? And those two things, they don't always go together. Being real sometimes means saying something that might not land well. It means being honest, even when it makes things a little uncomfortable. It means letting people see who you are without adjusting it too much. And at first, that's not easy, because it goes against years of habit. But slowly, you begin to loosen that need. You don't need everyone to like you the same way. You don't need to fit into every space. And something interesting happens when you stop trying so hard. Your world gets a little smaller, but it also gets clearer. Fewer people, but deeper connections. And then, there's one more layer, maybe the quietest one, letting go of that version of yourself that always tried to keep everything together, the one who avoided conflict, the one who made sure everyone else felt comfortable, the one who carried more than they should have, without saying anything. That version of you, it wasn't wrong. It helped you. It helped you navigate certain situations, keep relationships from falling apart, maintain a sense of stability, but it came at a cost. You held back. You absorbed things you didn't need to. You adjusted more than you probably should have. And over time, that becomes heavy. Not all at once, but gradually. And as you get older, you start to feel that weight more clearly. You begin to realize you don't have to carry all of that anymore. You don't have to manage everything. You don't have to make sure every situation feels smooth for everyone else. And that realization, it doesn't turn you into someone cold or distant. It just gives you space. Space to breathe. Space to speak without overthinking every word. Space to exist without constantly adjusting. And that's when something becomes clear. Letting go isn't always about removing people. Sometimes, it's about letting go of the pressure you've been putting on yourself for years, the expectations, the roles, the ways of being that you never really questioned until now. And when those begin to fall away, even slowly, everything starts to feel different, lighter, quieter, more balanced. It's a bit like how you care for your home. You don't always need to remove everything. Sometimes, you just need to create space, let things breathe, allow light to come in. Your inner life works the same way. You don't need to fix everything all at once. You just need to make room. Room for yourself. Room to be who you are now, not who you had to be before. And that space, it doesn't show up overnight. It grows through small moments, through quiet awareness, through choosing, again and again, what feels true instead of what feels expected. And maybe that's what growth looks like now. Not becoming someone completely new, but slowly, gently, letting go of what no longer fits, even if that includes parts of yourself you held on to for a long time. And when you do that, what's left may not feel perfect. It may not feel complete, but it feels real. And sometimes, that's exactly what you've been looking for all along. Sometimes, the thing that stays with you the longest isn't even the goodbye itself. It's the part that never quite makes sense. You know that feeling? When everything is quiet. Maybe early in the morning before the house fully wakes up, or late at night when the lights are off but your mind is still going. And that same question comes back again. Not loudly, just sitting there. Why did this happen? Why did this person leave my life like that? And maybe the hardest version of that question is this one. Why would God allow something that once felt so real, so meaningful, to just fade away? If you've ever sat with that thought, not said it out loud, not shared it with anyone, just held it inside, then you already know how heavy it can feel. Because it's not just about missing someone. It goes deeper than that. It's trying to understand something that doesn't quite fit into logic. It's trying to make sense of something that, honestly, doesn't make sense. There's a kind of confusion that comes with that. Not the kind that shows on the surface. Not something you easily explain. It's quieter. It stays with you. You replay things in your mind, conversations, little details, moments that didn't seem important at the time. You go back and look for a reason. You try to find the exact point where things changed. And sometimes, you just can't. There's nothing clear to point to. And that's when the question changes. It becomes less about them, and more about something bigger. Why did God let this happen? That question. It's not easy to sit with, because you've probably been taught, in one way or another, to trust, to believe that things happen for a reason, but when you're the one in it, when you're the one feeling that space where someone used to be, that belief can feel harder to hold on to than people realize. And still, if you give it time, something begins to soften. Not quickly, not in a way that suddenly answers everything. Just slowly. You start remembering something simple. Something you might have heard many times before, but maybe never really thought about deeply. There is a time for everything. A time when things begin. And a time when they end. It sounds almost too simple, but when you start looking at your own life through that lens, it begins to feel different. Because when someone enters your life, you don't think about the ending. You don't imagine that one day, things might not be the same. You just accept their presence. It becomes part of your normal. And maybe that's why it feels so difficult when it changes, because it was never supposed to feel temporary, at least not in your mind. But maybe, just maybe, not everyone is meant to stay forever. Maybe some people are meant to walk with you for a certain stretch of the road, to teach you something, to reflect something back to you, to be part of your life during a time when you needed exactly what they brought. And when that part is complete, they move on. Not because something went wrong, not because you failed, not because they failed, just because that chapter has ended. And accepting that, it's not easy, because we naturally want things to continue. We want consistency. We want to hold on to what felt good, what felt safe. But life and faith don't always follow what we expect. They move in their own way. There's another piece of this that people don't always talk about clearly. Love doesn't always mean holding on. We're taught to care deeply, to stay loyal, to not let go. But sometimes, love looks different than that. Sometimes love is quiet. It's allowing someone to follow their own path, allowing distance, even when it hurts, allowing something to end without forcing it to stay the same. And that kind of love, it's not loud. It doesn't always look strong from the outside, but in many ways, it is. Because it's not built on control, it's built on trust. Trust that people have their own timing, their own direction, even when that direction no longer lines up with yours. And then there's something even deeper, letting go. Not as giving up, but as trusting. Trusting that when something leaves your life, it doesn't mean your story is ending. It may feel like something has been taken from you. And in a way, it has. But there's another side to it. It can also be a kind of preparation, a quiet clearing, a making of space for something that you can't quite see yet. There's an image that helps make sense of this. Think about a garden. If you look at a tree that's been growing for years, your first instinct might be to leave it alone. Let it grow however it wants. Don't interfere. But someone who takes care of that tree sees it differently. They know that sometimes you have to cut certain branches, not because the tree is damaged, not because something is wrong, but because without that cutting, the tree won't grow the way it needs to. Some branches block the light, some take more than they give, and when they're removed, it doesn't look gentle. It can feel harsh. It can look like loss. But it's not destruction. It's care. It's part of helping something become healthier. And maybe, in a way that's hard to see at first, something similar happens in life. Certain relationships are removed, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a way that feels sudden, not because they didn't matter, not because they had no value, but because holding on to them exactly as they were would keep you from growing into what you're meant to become. And that's where faith comes in, because you don't always get to see what's ahead. You don't always understand why something had to change, but you're asked to trust that there is meaning, even when you can't see it yet. That what is leaving is making room, making space for something that fits who you are now, not who you used to be. That doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't make the process easy. You still feel the absence. You still remember what was. There are still moments where your mind goes back and wonders, what if things had been different? That doesn't go away overnight. And it's not supposed to. That's part of caring. But alongside that, something else begins to grow. Something quieter. A kind of peace that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up, little by little. A sense that you're not going through this alone. That even in the middle of loss, there is direction. There is something holding you steady, even if you don't fully understand it. And over time, the questions begin to change. You don't stop asking why completely, but you start asking something else. What is this trying to show me? Where is this leading me? And that shift, it changes everything. It doesn't erase what happened, but it changes how you carry it. It becomes less about something being taken away, and more about something unfolding. And maybe, this is where something simple becomes clear. There are people you can't keep, not because you're not enough, not because you didn't try, but because your paths no longer move in the same direction. And that's something God sees more clearly than we ever can. And when you begin to accept that, even just a little, something inside you relaxes. You breathe a little easier, not because you understand everything, but because you stop trying to force it to make sense. You let things be what they are, and in that space, you feel something you didn't expect. Not answers, not certainty, but support. A quiet sense that you're being guided, even now. And maybe that's where peace really begins, not in holding on, but in learning, slowly, to trust enough, to let go. There's a moment, and it doesn't really come all at once, when things start to look a little different. Not easier right away, not lighter in some obvious way, but clearer. That's the word. You don't suddenly feel better. You don't wake up and everything makes sense. But something inside you settles just enough for you to start seeing things differently. Not through what you thought life was supposed to be, not through how things used to feel, but through something quieter, something a little more honest than that. And maybe, if you've been sitting with all of this, if you've been listening, thinking, reflecting, you've started to notice that shift too. Because when you really look at everything we've talked about, it was never just about other people. It wasn't only about who stayed and who didn't. It goes deeper than that. It's about how you live with yourself, how your days feel when no one else is around, how your mind settles or doesn't, And that kind of understanding, it doesn't come quickly. It doesn't come from one moment or one decision. It builds, slowly, through small things, through quiet moments when you're sitting alone, maybe at the kitchen table, maybe in the living room with the TV on but not really watching, just noticing how you feel. Through those little realizations that don't seem like much at first. Like noticing that certain conversations leave you tired, or that certain people, even without doing anything wrong, just don't feel the same anymore. And little by little, you begin to see something more clearly. Growing older. It's not really about holding on to everything. It's not about keeping every relationship, every memory, every version of your life exactly the way it was. It can't be. Because if you try to hold on to everything, it gets heavy. Heavier than you expect. You carry too much. Too many expectations. Too many connections that don't quite fit anymore. Too many pieces of yourself that belonged to a different time. And at some point, you start to feel that weight. Not all at once. Just gradually. And that's usually when something begins to change. Not loudly. Not in a way anyone else notices right away. Just inside you. You begin to choose. Quietly. You start paying attention to how you feel around certain people. Who makes you feel calm? Who you can sit with, without having to think too much about what to say. Who you can be yourself around, without adjusting. And then, you notice the opposite too. The conversations that leave you feeling drained. The moments where you feel like you have to explain yourself, or hold something back, or soften who you are, just to keep things smooth. Those small feelings, they start to matter more. And this is where the real question comes in. Not something you say out loud. Not something you ask anyone else. Just something you ask yourself, quietly. Which relationship in my life is slowly wearing me down? You might not answer right away. In fact, most people don't. Because once you say it, even just to yourself, it becomes real. And that can feel uncomfortable. But once that question is there, it doesn't go away. It stays. And slowly, you start to see things more clearly. You start to notice patterns you didn't pay attention to before. You start to feel what you used to ignore. And from there, the next step doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be honest. Maybe it's giving yourself a little more space. Maybe it's not responding right away every time. Maybe it's simply noticing how you feel and letting that guide you, even in small ways. Because this isn't about cutting people off. It's not about being cold or distant. It's about something simpler than that. It's about aligning your life with what actually feels peaceful to you. And when you start doing that, even in small ways, things begin to shift. Not overnight, but steadily. A little each day. A little each moment. And here's something that matters more than you might think. You don't have to figure everything out right now. You don't need to make big decisions all at once. There's no need to rush this. This isn't about fixing your life in one step. It's about becoming aware and letting that awareness guide you slowly. Because everyone goes through this in their own way, at their own pace. And if you're here, if something in all of this feels familiar, then you've already started. Even if it doesn't feel like it, you're already beginning to see things differently. And that matters more than you realize. So maybe just take a moment, not a long one, just a pause, and ask yourself something simple. Is there a relationship in my life that no longer feels right? You don't need to do anything about it today. You don't need to solve it. Just notice it. Because sometimes, just seeing it clearly is the first step. And if you feel like it, you can sit with that thought a little longer. You can write it down, or just keep it to yourself. Or maybe share it with someone who understands. Because you're not the only one going through this. There are so many people, quietly, asking the same questions, feeling the same shifts, trying to find that same sense of peace. And if something here has stayed with you, then don't stop here. Keep reflecting, keep noticing, because this kind of growth, It doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in small reminders. In moments like this, in realizing you're not the only one feeling this way. And as you move forward, maybe there's just one thought you carry with you. Not as a rule, not something rigid, just something simple. Growing older isn't about keeping everything. It's about knowing what still belongs in your life and letting the rest fall away gently, without forcing it, without holding on too tightly, just allowing it. And if there's one thing to remember, maybe it's this: you don't really lose people by letting go, but you can lose yourself by holding on to what no longer feels right. And sometimes, choosing peace is the most important choice you'll ever make.